Hi guys, I'm Natasha and welcome back to another episode of The Usual Place. Prime Minister Lawrence Wong just dropped the much anticipated details of Budget 2026. Now this is the first budget of the new government that was elected last year. Big themes that stood out were firstly, the major push towards AI, and secondly, help for lower income families and seniors through different types of payouts and support schemes. And yes, there will still be CDC vouchers. All Singaporean households will be given $500 in January 2027. Now, on today's episode, I'll discuss the budget announcements and what it means for Singapore with my two guests. Firstly, I have Rebecca, Senior Lecturer Dr. Rebecca Grace Tan from the National University of Singapore, where you teach political science. And next to you on the couch, I have Mr. Musa Fazal, Chief Policy and Operating Officer at the Singapore Business Federation. So I shouldn't say welcome to the usual place because you've both been here.
Yep.
Musa's second time and Rebecca's been here many times before. Yes. But I want to start, so thank you both for being here. And I want to start with your thoughts on this year's budget. Like, how would you describe it and what stood out to you the most? Maybe Rebecca, you want to kick us off?
I think it was a little bit more muted, I think, is what surprised people. So a lot more focused on structural and longer term plans. For example, things I think people talked about the CDC vouchers. I was watching the comments as we were watching. So I was watching the comments on the side, and a lot of people were like, "The CDC vouchers only in 2027. It's only $500." So I think people were used to having much larger handouts, and this year the disbursements are significantly less.
Yeah,
but there's still quite a lot of spending. It's just that the spending is much more to do with big programs where the money will be probably more clearly not handed out as cash form. But yeah.
I mean, I think the contrast to last year
for sure.
is quite different for
stark,
many people. Yeah. Musa, do you have the same thoughts as Rebecca?
I mean, I wouldn't describe it as muted, but I agree that there's a completely different sort of focus and emphasis. And I think it probably reflects the fact that this is the first budget for a new term of government. And so I think the focus is largely on defining what are some of the priorities of that new term of government. So I see, as Rebecca said, a lot more emphasis on what are some of these strategic priorities. I see it as a response to the Economic Strategy Review Committee's work. There was a lot of emphasis on the economy. We started with that. It took up more than half of the budget speech. I can imagine for a lot of households and Singaporeans, those bits would have been pretty boring until they got to the CDC vouchers. So I can understand that. I can understand that's how people might respond to it. But I think from the business perspective, I think it's reassuring to see that the government is investing in some of the things that are necessary to help maintain our economic competitiveness over the long term.
Was there anything you were expecting that was not in the budget?
Anything that I was expecting that was not in the budget.
For you, very comprehensive. So I ticked all the boxes for this year.
Yeah, pretty much. I was hoping they were going to say something more specific on the carbon tax. It's an issue that I've been talking about recently. But they did allude to it, and they did say that they were prepared to moderate some of the plans with regards to that, just recognizing global realities. But yeah.
Rebecca, did you have anything that you were looking out for that?
I think there's been recent conversation on the rise of wealth inequality in Singapore, and so there was no mention of that. In terms of whether we are going to look at addressing that wealth inequality, because that seems to be one of the biggest concerns surrounding social mobility in Singapore. Not just an income one, but intergenerational wealth. So I was surprised there was not any mention of that being a concern, except for we want people to study harder and generally like to focus once again on education and reskilling and upskilling as a way of dealing with inequality, but not necessarily whether the government's going to intervene directly in terms of growing wealth divisions in Singapore. Yeah.
Okay, so let's talk about Singaporeans' favorite thing, CDC vouchers. I mean, we love having them. I mean, we do. I like having them. As you said, right, we'll get them in January next year. Yeah. And it's a smaller amount than what we got in the last budget. Yeah. Rebecca, how should we read into this measure? Because last year, I think it was twice. There were two tranches of CDC vouchers in last year's budget, coupled with the individual CDC vouchers. Will we see this being a permanent fixture in future budgets?
What do you think? So. I think that the vouchers are there and people have gotten used to having being given disbursements directly. It's definitely a big shift, I think, it's a new thing that Lawrence Wong added to his arsenal. We hadn't seen previous prime ministers use this as part of kind of a way of redistribution, I guess, in some ways. And it has had obviously quite significant effects upon spending patterns, but also I think more broadly in people being able to see their taxes having very direct effects. I think a lot of the ways in which we often see our taxes come back to us are often in the forms of subsidies. So you don't see the positive money come in, but you see yourself paying less. And sometimes that has a little bit less of an effect, a kind of positive effect upon your, believing that your money is being used in a way that directly benefits you. So certainly I think when you get cash, right, and you can spend that cash and you can feel as a direct, sort of immediate gratification from being able to, spend your CDC voucher on something that you may not otherwise be spent on. I was saying earlier to somebody, I use the CDC voucher for buying berries for my children, because if you ask me to use my hard-earned salary for buying strawberries for my children, I'm like, no, thank you. You are having papaya or something cheaper, because I'm stingy that way. And it feels there's a degree of gratification, and of course, then that obviously has knock-on effects for businesses. So I do think it has a feel-good effect. I think of having direct cash. There's a benefit, there's a psychological effect of that as well. So it will probably still be used in varying forms, but in some ways, the pulling back of the absolute amount is not surprising. So they really signal this, I think, or they set themselves up for being able to do that with shifting some of the labeling. So last year, the way they did that was by saying it was SG60, right? So some of the vouchers shifted to being labeled as SG60, which obviously means that this year don't have because not SG61 there's not. I mean, there's not.
They could.
But it's meant to be we are celebrating, right?
Yeah.
So I think there was kind of set up for that, and so people. It's. I think people. At least some of the commentary seemed to be suggesting people were expecting a little bit more of the pullback. Yeah. Of course, you would like it to be there, and people are disappointed that it maybe is not the same amount, and certainly they have to wait. And the other thing as well, I suppose, is because we've just been dispersed the last tranche from the previous budget. Right. So now we've got to wait 12 months. So I think that's the other thing that people are kind of contending with, right? If you spent this month, January's disbursement already, then you have to wait a while to your next disbursement.
I guess. Well,
maybe it's that.
But I think apart from the CDC vouchers being beneficial for households, actually one of the key objectives of it is also to help the retail heartland businesses and so on, which I think is a really important objective. Many of them are the ones that are struggling the most with cost pressures. And so the CDC vouchers are a great way of supporting them and helping Singaporeans to continue to support them, patronize them, and so on. But I think Rebecca raises an interesting point. This was something someone else spoke to me about, which is this idea of substitution. So a lot of people end up using their CDC vouchers for stuff they don't really need. And then the stuff they really need, they go to JB and buy it for cheaper. So I don't know whether that's a problem. And we have to just bear in mind that the RTS is opening this year. So that pressure on some of our heartland businesses is going to be even more acute. So I don't know. I'm kind of, on behalf of them, hoping that the government may consider some additional measures to support them beyond just the CDC vouchers.
Okay, that's actually a really interesting one. I mean, I didn't link it to a literal different country. But I wanted to ask about, how do you think this will square with a government that preaches self-reliance? Because in some sense, it's a lot less, right? Not a lot less, but it's lesser than what they gave out last year. I mean, do you think it will make Singaporeans dependent on these handouts? Because clearly from the comments, people were we expect it. When is it coming? Because I was watching it with Rebecca, and then we were looking at the comments and where's it?
Yeah.
So what do you think? Do you think it will make Singaporeans more dependent on these handouts?
I don't think so. I mean, certainly from an individual household perspective, right? If it could make you dependent, it would say a lot about cost of living being much lower. But because our cost of living is what it is, $500, is not going to go that far in this economy. And so whether it can really breed dependence, I think is quite unlikely. Now, I think the bigger issue is that if it's saving businesses, if the spending patterns are only sustained because of the CDP vouchers, and businesses are only staying afloat because of that, then that is a different issue. So I think there's something different, well, obviously from individual household kind of dependency, which I think is unlikely, versus the changing spending patterns. So I guess the proof will be, now that CDC vouchers have shrunk, or coming out later, do people sustain their spending patterns? I mean, hopefully they still go and support, their local cafe, because because they had initial CDC vouchers, they discovered that it was a really nice place. That's the hope. But if the point of CDC vouchers is to deal with the rising cost of living, then having them feel less cash in that sense may not have necessarily changed people's spending habits. If the only reason why they changed is because cash was put in their pockets. But it's hard to tell for now.
Do you think the vouchers solve structural inequality? Or is it just a band-aid?
No. I mean, structural inequality comes from a whole range of other things. I mean, we will talk a little bit about Comlink later, right? And things like employment issues. I mean, it gives people cash, but it doesn't necessarily mean that it is redistributing wealth in a prolonged way, right? Because it's a one-off cash payment, as opposed to, for example, providing regular cash payments, or doing things like, there's talk about, for example, subsidizing preschools and so forth a little bit more. So there are some structural shifts, but there are certain issues that I still think are not talked about. Questions of, when we talk about AI, we haven't talked about retrenchments in AI as a result of AI, but also as a result more broadly of the general economic outlook. And that was something that was missing in Lawrence Wong's speech in terms of concrete responses to questions about retrenchment, rising cost of living, that no $500 voucher is really going to mitigate.
I suppose there was some stuff about preschools, preschool costs, and managing some of those costs for families. Something about Comlink Plus, which I think is a really great scheme. And I think really important in helping some low-income families to get out of the poverty trap. Right? But I thought, I should just say this, that I don't think it's entirely a problem that government has to solve on its own. And I appreciate that the government also had some measures that they talked about in relation to things like corporate volunteering, philanthropy, and so on. So how can the business community, the businesses that are doing really well, how can they give back as well and help to address and redistribute some of the benefits that they've gotten to others in society.
So I will come back to Comlink in a bit, but I wanted to touch on AI since Rebecca brought it up. We're talking about it. It seems like this is a very AI budget thing. It was very heavy on AI initiatives, including setting up of a new National AI Council, which PM Wong will chair. Some have said that the language that he was using in the speech about AI was quite urgent and quite definitive. So if I ask you about it, let's hear a quick snippet of what he said during the budget.
AI is a powerful tool, but it is still a tool. It must serve our national interest and our people. We will define how AI is developed and used in Singapore. We will set clear rules to ensure it is applied responsibly and safely. And we will ensure that its benefits are shared widely across society. Harnessed well, AI will be a strategic advantage for Singapore. It can help us overcome our structural constraints, our limited natural resources, rapidly aging population, and tight labor market.
So, Musa, that's PM Wong talking about AI. I do agree that he was quite urgent and definitive in this push for AI.
Yeah, absolutely. The idea that he's setting up a National AI Council that will be chaired by himself, right, I think just goes to show the emphasis that they're putting on this AI strategy. But I suppose what you mentioned is entirely correct. The question is whether or not we'll be able to see the benefits of AI diffused to the rest of society, whether the benefits of it accrue largely to large enterprises that have the know-how on how to be able to deploy AI well. So I think a large chunk of his strategy is about how to do that, how to expand it, how to deepen the use of AI, and how to embed it, especially for certain priority sectors that contribute significantly to Singapore's economy. And I suppose if it's not unexpected that there's this huge emphasis on AI. I mean, if you think about it, as he pointed out, there are some resource constraints which are in a way immutable for Singapore. We have an aging population, we have a low fertility rate, we have a acute shortage of sufficient foreign manpower, and we've been talking about it for years. And we are a small country, so we have land constraints, we have energy constraints, we have no renewable sources of energy, carbon constraints. So, in a way, technology is I suppose, the one solution that can allow us to break this bottleneck. As a result of some of the constraints that we have. So I can see why the government feels very strongly that there's a need to push forward on AI and the opportunities that AI presents in helping us to overcome some of these constraints.
Rebecca, do you agree that that's why AI was such a big part of this budget now?
Yeah, I think the goal really is to try and get, he talks about not just AI, but it was a part of his broader theme, right, where he says, that Singapore's always been trying to get on the cutting edge. Right, the goal really is to not be playing catch up to what the global economy is doing and to fads or growing industries, but to be at the forefront of it, right? So that everybody else is catching up, right? So, he mentioned the semiconductor industry being the example, the historical example, and the continuing example, actually, in Singapore as well as, talk about quantum computing, biomedical science, and so forth. And I think the discussion about AI being, it's not new. It was discussed in some detail in the last budget as well, as part of the, skills future and so forth, right? So you could really see that direction going. Obviously, it's much more concerted. And I think there are a couple of I think the definitiveness, especially at the beginning of that clip that you just showed, of, we will control its effects. My sort of slight hesitance about that is, it in some ways, firstly, the use of AI or the, adoption of AI is a global phenomenon. It's very hard for us to control how it is being used by, firms elsewhere, how it is spread, right? Because there's a lot of personal usage that we can't necessarily control, its ills and so forth, right? And so to speak definitively, it requires an amount of regulation on AI usage that we also haven't necessarily developed either, right? So places like the EU have done a lot more work on AI regulation in terms of its impacts upon jobs and what the impacts are if you get retrenched because of AI. So it was a very positive note about we can harness its benefits and mitigate its harms. We saw a lot of efforts to harness its benefits, not a lot of how we're mitigating the harms, beyond just, we hope you can harness the skills so that you can benefit, I think was the language of reskilling. And that's definitely possible. But there are lots of key assumptions behind the argument that you can acquire the skills to basically not be replaced by AI, so that AI doesn't create costs, but instead augments the economy rather than substitutes jobs. Yeah.
I want to ask Musa, because what you're saying is basically we need the general conversations that we need AI to help upskill people so that people don't lose jobs. But how do you think companies will be able to jump on this AI push? Because a lot of it is a lot of broad strokes, right? So for especially companies like non-tech companies and SMEs, which may not have economies of scale to put money into AI tech, how will they adapt? How will they... One thing PM Wong said, he said many firms say they're using AI, but end-to-end transformation is demanding.
Yes.
So how will this play out in the future if we are going to push so strongly for AI?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I think one of the things that they talked about was this idea of having national AI missions, so focusing on a few priority sectors. And I think, if you take a leaf from what MAS did for the financial sector, so they had what they call a sectoral pathfinder program, where they try to work with a couple of trailblazing companies and try to see how those companies deploy the use of technology, and then try to scale it to the rest of companies within the sector. And I think that's probably the best approach to take if you want to see sort of a widespread deployment. So I think it makes sense that they're trying to, it sounds like that's what they're trying to do with the sectoral strategy to facilitate that deployment. But I agree with you. At the current moment, what we're seeing is that the benefits of AI are accruing to the larger companies who are able to make those investments to do the end-to-end business transformation. So I think even Min Josephine Teo, when she spoke about this recently, and PM mentioned it as well, there are about 60 new AI centers of excellence. And the companies that you mentioned, Google, Microsoft, I mean, these are the big companies, right? So it's not the SMEs that are benefiting from it yet. But I think it's the stuff that he talked about are in the right direction. So he mentioned the Productivity Solutions Grant, which is a scheme that provides sort of whitelisted digital solutions, makes it more affordable and accessible to SMEs, and they plan to expand that to include AI solutions. So that's, stuff like that will help with SMEs being able to embrace some of that.
So beyond cost, which is a major one.
Yes.
Do you see any difficult challenges for local businesses integrating AI into their business plans?
Yeah. There's the cost issue. There's also, I suppose, redesigning your business process, which for a lot of SMEs who have very limited bandwidth, it's not something that they can readily do on their own. So having access to some kind of support, maybe some form of consultancy services that can allow them, that can assist them, walk them through that journey of rethinking their business processes. That might be something that maybe the government could take a look at. I think, what I mentioned about maybe taking a sectoral approach, because then the types of AI solutions that are being developed are more customized to the needs of the SMEs in that particular sector and not just generalized solutions.
Actually, what's the current picture of AI adoption in firms? Like right now, like working, when you chat with local SMEs, are they like, oh...
Well, we just did a survey on that. So
what did the survey say?
The survey said that AI adoption is generally pretty high, actually. And if we compare it with other countries, actually, our companies are adopting AI. They're aware of it. And there are quite a lot of examples of companies who say they are piloting it, they're experimenting with it. But a lot of the use cases are pretty narrow. So a lot of companies are using it to help with drafting emails.
So they're using like ChatGPT, or like what are they using AI for?
Drafting proposals.
Some content creation type stuff, a little bit of productivity improvements. But as we said, the end-to-end business transformation, that's not really happening yet.
So the other thing on the workforce front that came up was the changes to the employment pass and the S pass. So in a way, it's kind of like tightening the screws because the minimum qualifying salary will go up, right, from January next year. So in a way, kind of like an encouragement to hire local first. It's not the first time that the salary threshold has been raised. I think the last change was kicked in on 1st Jan 2025. How big of an impact will it have on hiring plans for business? Because they already got to use AI.
Well, might push them to use more AI, I guess. If it now becomes more costly to use people and they can't find people, then you might have a situation. I mean, it could either push you to hire more locals if you think locals have the requisite skills, or to become more productive so that you don't need to, you can replace the jobs that are now more expensive. So
I imagine from the government's perspective, both good outcomes, right? If you can get more locals, or if you can get companies to be more productive. But I suppose the key concern, and Rebecca and I were talking about this earlier, is on competitiveness. Because, Singapore is a very open economy. Many of our companies have many options in terms of where they operate from. One of the key reasons why Singapore is an attractive place is because it is a hub for global talent. And if the cost of hiring global talent in Singapore becomes prohibitively high, then it might affect your decision about whether to locate your facilities here or whether to do it somewhere else where you can access that global talent at a lower cost. So it's something to consider. I mean, we were saying that, we have other things going from us apart from manpower costs, right? We have the quality of our manpower. We have connectivity, infrastructure, access to R&D and innovation facilities, stuff like that. But companies, manpower still makes up a huge amount of costs for a lot of companies. So it's going to be an important part of their investment considerations.
I think not to mention that there have been other rising costs as well, right? So there's been an ongoing conversation about rental being one of those big costs on top of manpower, right? So companies shifting out or shutting down, and one of the reasons they cite is the cost of rent. And so, you have liquidations going on, local companies, you have companies shrinking offices or shifting to maybe a cheaper office rather than being, for example, in the central business district. And all those things have knock-on effects, right? Or there's signs that companies are recognizing that it's expensive to operate in Singapore. And then it's a question of, if you increase the cost of hiring someone, either local or foreigner, because it has impact upon local wages as well, because it's effectively a minimum wage for a local worker.
Yeah, and in fact, the local qualifying salary has actually
Has
gone
everything,
up. Yeah.
basically everything.
Everything's gone up, right? Yeah, so everything's gone up. So the cost of labour has therefore gone up. And the question then is it gone up to the point where firms will say, I think, firstly, obviously in the short term, can I afford it? And when prices have already gone up, or costs have already gone up. But I think the other thing as well that's important to note is that this is not a one-off shift up. It happened last year as well. And what we are seeing is a trend of tightening immigration. And that's obviously a response to public sentiment and so forth, and concerns over, whether immigration is causing various different ills. But if you're firm and thinking about coming to Singapore, or you're firm and thinking about your longer term prospects in Singapore, you're projecting, right? Not just into what will happen in 2027, but let's say next year's budget, will there be another increase? Because the track record seems to suggest that we are increasing.
And especially because they tied it to the increases in the local salaries,
exactly, yeah.
which are going to keep going up,
Yeah,
right?
exactly.
So I think from the perspective of a foreign MNC thinking about whether to invest in Singapore, it just seems to suggest that the trajectory is just going to.
Did you get texts from business owners saying, "Oh no, I'm a bit worried," or like,
Confirm.
Don't check your phone yet.
how much substantially will this affect costs, like operating costs? You think?
I don't know yet. I think people are going to go back and do their sums, and to be fair, it kicks in next year for new applications and for renewals only the year after. But businesses will factor this into their decisions at the end of the day. But I agree with what Rebecca said earlier as well, that I think businesses will have to, it's all part of the cost of doing business in Singapore, and you have to think about what are some other ways that you can try to manage some of those costs if, this is the trajectory when it comes to foreign manpower costs. Yeah.
I don't know, as a bit of a concern. You have very concerned look on your face. He's like, oh my goodness, how am I going to manage this? Okay.
It's a big issue.
Well, let's talk about Comlink, which also came up, and we were speaking about it earlier. So it's help for lower income Singaporeans. There's a new $500 quarterly payout for Comlink Plus families, and another Comlink Plus payouts are also being enhanced, right? Yeah. Do you get the sense that as we try to grow the economy, there's also this worry that those who are less, well off are getting left behind in a sense?
Yeah. I mean, there was a mention of the MOF report. So Lawrence Wong mentioned, passing reference to the MOF report, talks about, wage inequality and so forth. But one of the points that was made in the MOF report was the fact that we are increasingly seeing less social mobility. So while people are getting wealthier than their parents, so this is absolute mobility, right? So you are earning more than your parents. If everybody's earning more than their parents, then everybody's still staying stagnant relative to each other. So the concern is relative, what they call relative mobility or immobility, I guess, which is that the people who are in the lower deciles, the lower incomes, stay in lower incomes. They don't, over their lifetime, do not move out, and they stay in the same income bracket as their parents. So we're not seeing shifts out of brackets. And of course, you see this in other measurements as well. Things like, for example, family income is a greater determinant of, educational success. And people believe that. So it's not just that it's that, it's obviously is real and measurable, but that people also believe that, and it has other kind of implications when people start believing that. It's a widespread belief that that meritocracy doesn't. I mean, meritocracy does not actually work as advertised, and so I think that in some ways is that, you know, Comlink Plus is meant to help that, to support families to work, and a lot of the narrative is I mean, largely the same, I think. So while there's more monetary support, a lot of the narrative is still, you know, if you work with us at, you know, pulling yourself out of poverty, or of looking for a job, and those are good things, right? That we obviously want people to be looking for jobs, but it still places, I think, a lot of the responsibility on the individual and the individual family, to kind of like pull themselves up by their bootstraps. And I do think that, as I mentioned, I think a little bit earlier, it's not just those who are at the bottom, right? But questions of whether you have, I mean, what that means to kind of be looking for a job. I mean, when you're talking about now the expectation being AI readiness, right? Like the level keeps going up in terms of what it looks like to be competitive with the job market. And you're talking about, you know, those who are getting support from Comlink Plus, that's a much bigger jump than even just the sort of average middle class worker, right? And I think that's something we have to have conversations about, which is, you know, when we say you're looking for a job and all those expectations, there's still a lot of that responsibility placed upon the individual. You know, are you sending your kids to preschool? And it's great that they are providing those that help, but also questions of, you know, broader, should we just giving them aid? First, because sometimes giving them the cash that is not conditional often helps them have the agency to start moving themselves out. So there's that conversation, I think, surrounding the way we give welfare in Singapore and provide support, whether it comes with strings attached, and whether the strings do help or they sometimes are more of a challenge, or they don't necessarily take into account why recipients of this support do not always fulfill the criteria. So you have had various people, I mean, like Teo Yuan's looked into that, right? Why, you know, for example, you know, Skills Future, for example, is meant to help especially lower skilled workers. I mean, the higher skilled workers in many cases often already have the resources or themselves are quite competitive to begin with. But we often find that lower skilled workers don't use Skills Future. And one of the issues is there are structural limitations or there's systemic limitations to them using the vouchers, right? Can't take time off work, right? You have a less flexible schedule, you have caregiving duties. And those are conversations we need to have about adjusting, I think, to recognizing that some of the approaches we have, while they might be in principle good, may not necessarily work for certain segments of society. But then it seems almost a one-size-fits-all. You've got to show that you are working hard. You've got to show that you can hold down a job, or that you're looking for a job, that you can send your kids to preschool. But there are many other structural constraints that make that a little bit harder. Or make that quite a lot harder, not a little bit harder, quite a lot harder for recipients. But I think in general, the idea that they're giving support, and they're getting support from not just cash, but also getting help with, you know, working with staff workers is good. Hopefully, you know, we'll see that, for example, in things like increased spending in general broader social services, so that, you know, social workers are better paid, we can get more social workers, because if you want to do all these things, there's a lot more spending that needs to happen beyond just a cash transfer, right? A lot more support. And there's been conversations about, for example, do we have enough social workers, right? And that's an ongoing conversation in Singapore about the way we spend and our social spending.
Right.
But so just on the income inequality point, and I mean, Rebecca's more of an expert on this than I am, but I thought the MOF report showed that income mobility is still happening. So people are moving up at least one rung in terms of their the decile or the quintile that they're in. But it's slowing down. So there's this fewer of them
are moving up.
Yeah. So there's this concern that over time it's becoming more entrenched. Once you're in a particular decile, you tend to get stuck there.
Yeah.
Right. So people who are in the top deciles, because of the resources that they have, more likely to stay in that top decile. People who are in the bottom deciles more likely to stay in the bottom. And I fully agree with you that it's a problem. We have to do more. And wealth inequality, I think, is one of the areas where we tend not to do so well. And we need to find some way of redistributing wealth. But I suppose And you know what you bring up about jobs and the narrative that we have that actually being able to have a good job is an important part of supporting that mobility. That's going to be a lot harder to be able to do going forward. And this was, I think, something even DPM Gan mentioned when he released the ESR report. Because the idea is that a lot of the sectors that are going to contribute to Singapore's economic growth going forward are not necessarily sectors that create a lot of good jobs, right? And if you think about these sectors being disrupted and transformed by AI, even more so. So then where do most Singaporeans work? What types of jobs are they going to take up? And are these jobs the kinds of jobs that will still sustain income mobility for future generations?
So we might have a bigger economy, but less jobs.
Less jobs, yeah.
I think a lot of the language that we have around growth is around growth, assuming that growth brings jobs. But what we're increasingly finding, and I mean, this is across, right, in places like the US as well, where obviously you've had growth, productivity, but hasn't been translated into jobs. So there is more productivity, but not necessarily greater growth in the actual job market. And in some ways, sometimes you actually see shrinkage, right? So there's a weird paradox of growth in terms of absolute, 2-3% growth, and that looks great, right? And even GDP growth, right? You look at those measures. But then when you say, but the labour force is contracting, right? We're seeing retrenchments. We're seeing that unemployment is remaining high. So I think that the big question is the challenging one of what happens when there's growth. And growth can be good, but how do we reconcile with a world where growth may not mean more jobs and may result in fewer jobs? Do we magically create jobs? Like, where do these jobs come from? So like if we reskill, I was asking somebody, I said, if you reskill somebody, and they move up, right? Their job is replaced by AI and they move up. That assumes that the higher tier of skills have the same number of jobs as the lower tier, which may not be the case, right? Because AI is it's meant to be more efficient, right? The joke of when they invented the washing machine, right? You had lots of, women or individuals who no longer could wash laundry by hand. Now, they could all become washing machine technicians, but do we need the same number of washing machine technicians as we did, people who did laundry by hand, right? Like, those are the big questions we want to ask. Or do washing machine industries now create a whole new set of jobs that replaces it? They're those questions that we've got to contend with. We don't know the answer yet because obviously we haven't seen that structural unemployment yet. But then the other question, of course, being the lag time. Like, even if people reskill, what is the lag time between then? Do we have support for them, adequate support in the time that they have between possibly losing their jobs and the reskilling process? And that often takes time, assuming you can reskill fast enough to keep up with AI's evolution, which is, a big unknown nobody really can answer.
I think you've both given us a lot of food for thought. I'm thinking about how how I can incorporate AI into my job. I might be an AI avatar in the future.
Keep reskilling.
Yeah, but thank you both for being here, and I'm sure our audience is thinking about how we can deal with this year's budget. So thank you both for being here, and come back. Musa, will I see you next year? Please put it in your calendar. Yes. Well, thank you both for being here.
Thank you so much.
And that's it from The Usual Place today. I'll be back on Monday with Second Minister for Finance Indranee Rajah and 2 other guests to talk more about Budget 2026. Now, if you're watching us on YouTube, do subscribe and hit the notification bell so you won't miss new episodes of the podcast. And if you have thoughts on what we just discussed today, do drop a comment on YouTube or talk to me on Instagram at The Usual Place Podcast. I will see you next week.